When I was 10 years old, the yellow house at the end of our street became home to a new face, Mrs. Evelyn Harper. She was a small, silver-haired woman with kind eyes and a warm smile, the kind of smile that made you feel safe before she even said a word. The day she moved in, my mom sent me over with a plate of brownies as a welcome gesture. I still remember clutching that plate, feeling nervous about meeting her. I was a shy kid, the kind who avoided eye contact with strangers and never spoke unless spoken to. But when I knocked, she opened the door and the smell of freshly baked cookies drifted out like a warm blanket. "Well, aren't you just the sweetest little thing?" she said, her voice soft but playful. "Come in, come in. You've saved me the trouble of making dinner." I laughed, not because her joke was that funny, but because her voice had this magical ability to make you feel like you belonged. She took the brownies, set them down, and offered me a cookie from the cooling rack on her counter. I still remember biting into it, chewy, warm, and filled with chocolate chips that melted in my mouth. From that day on, Mrs. Harper became a part of my world. She had this habit of baking every Thursday afternoon, and somehow, without ever being officially invited, I started showing up at her door after school. She never made me feel like a bother. In fact, she'd greet me with, "There's my favorite taste tester," and push a plate of cookies toward me. My parents loved her too. Mom would say, "It's good for you to have someone else in your life who cares about you." And Dad often waved to her from the driveway. She was like the neighborhood grandma, though she had no kids or grandkids of her own, or so she told us. Over the years, she became more than just a neighbor. She was someone I told my secrets to, someone who listened when I talked about my fights with friends or my fear of speaking up in class. She'd sit in her rocking chair with a cup of tea and let me ramble, nodding like every word I said mattered. Sometimes she'd tell me little stories about her younger days, always careful to keep them lighthearted. A summer she spent traveling, a pet cat she loved, a recipe she perfected in college. But looking back, I realized she never mentioned a family. No parents, no siblings, no husband. At the time, I didn't think it was strange. I just assumed she liked her privacy. One rainy Saturday afternoon, when I was about 13, I asked her why she moved into our town. She paused, the teacup halfway to her lips. For a moment, I thought I saw something flicker in her eyes, a shadow of sadness. But then she smiled and said, "Sometimes we just need a change of scenery, sweetheart." And that was the end of it. Mrs. Harper was the kind of person who made everything feel stable, predictable. She remembered every birthday, baked cookies in the exact same way every week, and never failed to ask about my day. That constancy became a kind of anchor for me, especially as I hit my teenage years and life at home grew more complicated. My parents' marriage wasn't falling apart exactly, but it was shifting. Arguments about bills, late nights where Dad didn't come home until after dinner, Mom sighing a lot more than she used to. I didn't always want to be home, and so I found myself knocking on Mrs. Harper's door more often, even on days when there weren't cookies in the oven. She never turned me away. Instead, she'd pour me a glass of milk, hand me a warm blanket, and let me sit quietly while she read or worked on her crossword puzzles. She didn't pry unless I started talking, but when I did, she listened, really listened like I was the most important person in the room. One day, when I was 15, she handed me a small, wrapped box. It was on my birthday, and I was confused. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a tiny charm shaped like a cookie. "It's silly, I know," she said, smiling shyly. "But I thought you might like to have something to remember me by. You know, when you're all grown up and too busy for old ladies like me." I remember feeling a lump in my throat. "I'll never be too busy for you." She laughed softly. "We'll see." At the time, I thought she was just being playful. I didn't realize she was trying to tell me something. By the time I was 17, I had a part-time job after school and saw her a little less often, but she was still a fixture in my life. Whenever I passed her house, I'd see her at the window, waving like she'd been waiting for me to walk by. And every once in a while, I'd still stop in for a cookie and a chat. I had no idea that soon, one ordinary Thursday, everything would change. that the warm kitchen smell, the sound of her gentle laugh, the comfort of her rocking chair, all of it would be gone. And that in the days that followed, I'd find something that would make me question everything I thought I knew about the woman who had been like a grandmother to me. It was late October, the air sharp with that crisp autumn chill that makes you want to wrap yourself in a blanket and drink hot chocolate. School had been exhausting that week, with 2 tests and a group project that no one else in my group seemed to care about. I told myself I'd stop by Mrs. Harper's house after school for a cookie and maybe a chat. I needed the comfort. I walked up her driveway, noticing a few leaves scattered across her porch. Usually, she swept them up almost every day. It was such a small thing, but it caught my attention. Still, I brushed it off and knocked. No answer. That was unusual. Mrs. Harper was almost always home on Thursdays. I knocked again, louder this time, and even pressed the doorbell. Silence. I pulled out my phone and texted my mom. Me. Mrs. Harper's not answering her door. Is she out? Mom. Not sure, sweetheart. Maybe she's with a friend or at the store. It was possible. But something about it didn't sit right with me. The next day, there was still no sign of her. The curtains were drawn, and the mailbox was stuffed full. On Saturday morning, I decided I couldn't take it anymore and told my mom I was worried. She nodded slowly, her face tight. I'll give her a call, she said. I watched her dial, listened to her end of the conversation, or rather, the lack of one. No answer. Finally, Mom bit her lip and said, I think we should check with the neighbors across the street. Maybe they've seen her. We went together, and that's when we learned the truth. Mrs. Harper had passed away. It had happened on Thursday morning, the very day I knocked on her door, a heart attack in her sleep. The neighbors told us that the paramedics had come early, quietly, and taken her away. She had no close family to notify, so everything had been handled quickly. The words didn't sink in right away. Passed away. I'd heard the phrase before, but never about someone who had been such a constant in my life. I thought about the silver bracelet, the cookies, the way she always waved when I walked by. I felt my throat close up, like if I let myself breathe too deeply, I'd fall apart. That night, I sat in my room and stared at the bracelet. My eyes burned, but I didn't cry, not at first. It wasn't until I imagined walking past her yellow house and never seeing her at the window again that the tears came, hot and relentless. The days that followed felt strange. The yellow house was quiet. The shades stayed down. My parents said someone from the town would eventually take care of her belongings since she had no known relatives. It felt wrong, like the world was erasing her too quickly. A week later, I got home from school and saw something sticking out of our mailbox, an envelope with my name written in her delicate, looping handwriting. I froze. It didn't make sense. She'd been gone for over a week. My hands shook as I pulled it out. The envelope was sealed, and the paper felt thick, almost formal. There was no return address, no stamp. Which meant someone had placed it there directly. Someone who wanted me to have it. I ran inside and sat on my bed, staring at it for what felt like hours before I finally tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded in half. My breath caught as I began to read. My dear Lily, if you're reading this, then I'm no longer around to see you grow into the amazing person I know you'll become. There are things I've kept from you, not because I didn't trust you, but because I wanted to protect you until you were old enough to understand. You deserve to know the truth about who I am and why I came to this town. Everything you've known about me isn't the whole story. I wasn't always Mrs. Harper, and I wasn't always the person you think I was. If you want answers, go to the attic of my house. In the far corner, under the floorboards, there's a small wooden box. Inside, you'll find everything. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you in person. I hope one day you'll understand. With all my love, Evelyn. My heart pounded. The words felt unreal, like a scene from a movie. The sweet cookie-baking woman who'd been like a grandmother to me had been hiding something? I read the letter 3 more times, searching for clues, for some hint of what she meant. What could she possibly have been keeping from me? Why did it feel like she was speaking in riddles? That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured the yellow house, the dark attic, and a wooden box holding secrets I couldn't even imagine. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I had to go into that attic. Saturday morning, the sky was heavy with clouds, the kind that made the whole neighborhood look muted and still. My parents thought I was going to the library to study for an upcoming history test, but in reality, I had a very different plan. I walked slowly toward the yellow house, every step making my heart thud harder. It had been over a week since I'd been this close. Without Mrs. Harper at the window, the place felt hollow. The flowers in her front garden were starting to wilt, the porch swing sat motionless, and the air around the house seemed heavier, like it knew something had changed. The front door was locked, of course, but I knew where Mrs. Harper kept the spare key. She'd told me once, in case of emergencies, though I'm sure she never imagined this would be the reason I used it. I crouched by the large potted plant near the steps, reached underneath, and my fingers brushed cold metal. The door creaked as it opened, and instantly, the familiar smell of cookies, cinnamon, and old books washed over me, except it was faint now, almost ghostly. I stepped inside. Everything was exactly as she left it. A half-finished crossword sat on the kitchen table. A folded tea towel rested neatly by the sink. I half expected her to walk in from the other room, wearing her soft cardigan, saying, "Well, there's my favorite taste tester." But the silence was absolute. I closed the door behind me and turned toward the hallway. The attic door was at the end, a small square panel in the ceiling with a pull string dangling down. I'd never been up there before. The ladder groaned as I pulled it down and climbed up. The attic was dim, the only light coming from a tiny window near the roof. Dust floated in the air like lazy snowflakes. Boxes were stacked haphazardly, and an old trunk sat against one wall. Her letter had been clear, far corner, under the floorboards. I crouched and scanned the room until I found the spot she described. A faded rug pushed into a corner, half covering a section of wooden planks that didn't quite match the rest. My hands trembled as I rolled back the rug and pried at the floorboards. They came up with surprising ease, revealing a small cavity. And there it was, the wooden box. It was no bigger than a showbox, but heavier than I expected when I lifted it out. The wood was dark and worn, the brass latch slightly tarnished. My pulse quickened as I unhooked it and slowly lifted the lid. Inside was a stack of old photographs, a bundle of yellowed letters tied with twine, and a worn leather journal. The first photograph made me frown. It was of a young woman, maybe in her 20s, standing beside a man in front of a small diner. She was smiling, but it wasn't the calm, gentle smile I knew from Mrs. Harper. This was different, brighter, more confident. And her hair was dark brown, not silver. I stared harder. It took me a moment to realize the woman was Mrs. Harper, but not as I'd ever seen her. The second photo showed her holding a baby in her arms. My chest tightened. She'd always told me she never had children. The letters were addressed to someone named Anna. My breath caught. Who was Anna? Was that Mrs. Harper's real name? I untied the twine and carefully unfolded the top letter. My dearest Anna, I don't know where you are or if you'll ever read this, but I can't stop thinking about you and the baby. I wish things had been different. I wish I could have convinced you to come home. I just hope you're safe. And the words were shaky, smudged in places like someone had been crying while writing them. I grabbed the journal next, flipping it open to the first page. The handwriting matched the letter she'd left me. The first entry was dated over 30 years ago. March 12th. I left today. I don't know if I'll ever go back. I'm scared, but I have to keep her safe. My stomach flipped. Her, the baby from the photo? The more I read, the more I realized these weren't just diary entries. They were confessions. She wrote about running away from someone dangerous, about changing her name, about moving from town to town, never staying in one place too long. And then there was one line that made my blood run cold. If they ever find out who I am, they'll take everything from me, including her. Her. I sat back, the box open in front of me, my hands cold. Mrs. Harper, or Anna, or whoever she really was, had been hiding from someone. And she'd had a child. But where was that child now? And why had she never told me any of this? I was so deep in thought that I didn't hear the floor creak behind me until it was too late. Looking for something? A voice said. I spun around and nearly dropped the box. It was a man I'd never seen before, standing in the attic doorway. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard it hurt. The man standing in the attic doorway wasn't someone I recognized from the neighborhood. He was tall, with graying hair, wearing a dark coat despite the mild weather. His eyes swept the room, landing on the open wooden box at my feet. I instinctively pushed the box closer to me, my pulse roaring in my ears. Who are you? I stammered. He stepped inside, his shoes creaking against the floorboards. I could ask you the same thing. This isn't your house, is it? I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Mrs. Harper was my neighbor. She left me a letter. His brow furrowed at the mention of her name. Mrs. Harper? He let out a short, humorless laugh. So that's what she was calling herself now. I froze. The way he said it, like he knew her, but not as Mrs. Harper, sent a cold shiver through me. I think you should leave, I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. But he ignored me, walking closer. How long have you known her? Since I was 10, I said. My voice shook despite my efforts. She was like family. He nodded slowly, almost sympathetically. Then I guess you deserve to know the truth. Her name wasn't Evelyn Harper. It was Anna Morris. And she's been running for more than 30 years. The name from the letters. I gripped the edge of the box. Running from what? His eyes flicked toward the photographs and letters. From me. My blood ran cold. She took something from me, he continued, his tone low but steady. Something I could never get back. And she took someone from me too. The baby. She told me she never had kids, I blurted. His expression tightened. Of course she did. That's what you say when you've stolen a child and you're trying to disappear. My mind was spinning so fast I could barely keep up. Was he saying Mrs. Harper kidnapped her own child? Or someone else's? Who was telling the truth here? I don't believe you, I said, though my voice lacked conviction. He crouched down so we were eye level. Then read the rest of that journal. See if she ever told you the whole story. I've been looking for her for decades, and now. Well, I guess I'm too late. He stood and turned toward the attic stairs. But if you find her daughter, if she's still alive, you tell her Martin is looking for her. And I won't stop. Before I could respond, he was gone, the creak of the ladder fading, the front door clicking shut. I sat frozen for a long time, the attic air feeling suddenly heavier. My mind replayed his words over and over. She's been running for more than 30 years. She stole someone. If she's still alive. When I finally had the courage to move, I grabbed the journal and started flipping through it. The later entries were more frantic, written in quick, messy strokes. They came to the diner again today. I saw him across the street. I know it's only a matter of time before he finds me. She's growing so fast. She doesn't know the truth. She can't. I'll do anything to keep her safe. If you're reading this, I hope you understand why I did what I did. You were never meant to be part of that life. The last entry was dated almost 20 years ago. After that, nothing. I sat back, my hands shaking. The story Martin told and the one in Mrs. Harper's journal didn't match completely, but both agreed on one thing: there was a child, and she'd been hiding her. The question was, from who? I put the box back under my arm and climbed down from the attic, locking the door behind me. My mind was already made up. If Mrs. Harper trusted me enough to leave this for me, then it was my responsibility to find the truth. even if it meant finding the daughter she hidden all those years ago. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mrs. Harper's smile, the man's cold stare, and the tiny baby in that faded photograph. The unanswered questions gnawed at me until I knew I had no choice. I had to start digging. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with the wooden box in front of me. My parents had left for the grocery store, giving me a few hours alone. I laid everything out, the photos, the letters, the journal, and tried to piece the timeline together. Mrs. Harper, Anna Morris, had left a man named Martin decades ago, taking a baby with her. Martin claimed the baby was his. Anna claimed she was protecting her. But who was the child? And where was she now? I decided to start with the journal. I read every single page, this time slower, letting the details sink in. There were mentions of moving between small towns, using different names, working odd jobs, always looking over her shoulder. But around the middle of the journal, there was an entry that made my heart stop. I've found a safe place. A quiet neighborhood. They'll never think to look for us here. I'm registering her for kindergarten next week. I've told her my name is Evelyn Harper now. She's young enough to forget the others. She needs stability. The date on the entry was 20 years ago. My breath caught. 20 years ago. I did the math. That would have been the year before I was born. A horrible thought wormed its way into my mind. What if the her in the journal wasn't just some child Mrs. Harper knew before she met me? What if? I flipped to the very last entry again. The words blurred for a second before I forced myself to focus. If she ever learns the truth, I hope she understands I loved her. More than anyone else ever could. I pushed the journal aside, my hands shaking. The answer hit me like a punch to the stomach. It wasn't just that Mrs. Harper had a child. It wasn't just that she was hiding her from someone dangerous. It was me. I was the child. The bracelet she'd given me when I was 15, something to remember me by, suddenly took on a whole new meaning. The way she'd always been protective, the way she seemed to know things about me no one else did. The little looks she gave me when she thought I wasn't paying attention. Memories I hadn't thought about in years came rushing back. The times I'd stayed over at her house as a little kid, when she'd tell me bedtime stories about princesses who had to run from the castle to stay safe. The way she'd tear up when she hugged me goodbye. I grabbed my birth certificate from the file cabinet in my parents' study. My eyes scanned the page and froze. The mother line was blank. My breathing quickened. My parents had told me I was adopted, yes, but only when I was old enough to understand. They'd said my birth mother had died when I was a baby. What if that wasn't true? I didn't even hear my parents come back from the store until my mom's voice startled me. Lily? What are you doing in there? I turned to face them, my chest heaving. Who was she? Really? They exchanged a look. My dad set the grocery bags down slowly. You went to her house, my mom said quietly. I had to, I said, my voice trembling. She left me a letter. She told me to find the box. And I found the journal. She called herself Anna. She wrote about protecting a little girl. About running from someone named Martin. Mom. My voice cracked. Was that me? Silence. Then my mom's shoulders sagged, and she nodded. She was your biological mother, she said. She brought you to us when you were 5. She said she couldn't give you the life you deserve, but she didn't want you going to foster care. We promised we'd keep you safe. We promised we'd never tell unless she wanted us to. My legs felt like they might give out. All those years, I whispered. She visited as your neighbor so she could still see you, Dad added. It was her way of making sure you were okay without putting you in danger. I sat down hard, my mind spinning. The woman who'd baked me cookies, who'd listened to all my teenage drama, who'd hugged me like she'd never let go. She wasn't just my neighbor. She was my mother. And the man in the attic, Martin, was my father. I didn't know what to feel. Anger that they'd kept it from me? Grief that she was gone? Fear about what Martin might do now? Or something deeper, a strange, aching gratitude that she'd spent her entire life protecting me. That night, I put the bracelet on and held it close. I didn't know if I'd ever meet Martin again. I didn't know if I wanted to. But I knew one thing for sure. Mrs. Harper, Anna, loved me enough to give up everything just to keep me safe. And that kind of love changes you forever.